Imagine this. You board a regular flight. No attention to be drawn in, no special privileges asked for. Just a quiet, polite black man sitting in economy class. Then, suddenly, the pilot looks at you with a cold gaze. A half-joking, half-contemptuous remark. A small gesture, but enough to make you understand you are being looked down upon. What will you do? Will you remain silent and let the flight pass smoothly? Or will you stand up, take the risk, just to preserve your self-respect? What makes this story special isn't the insult itself. Rather, it's that the person who was insulted was the one who had the power to decide the fate of that flight. But he didn't say anything. He didn't reveal his identity. He didn't react impulsively. He chose to remain silent and wait for the truth to speak for itself. The question is, if it were you, would you be calm enough not to retaliate immediately? And would you be brave enough to choose the right thing, even when no one is on your side? If you've ever been looked down upon, ever been judged solely on your appearance, then this story is for you. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join me in this story, a story not just about discrimination, but about character choices and the power of composure. No one on Flight AA 417 that day imagined they were about to witness a moment that would haunt them for a long time to come. The Boeing 737 was parked at Gate C-19 of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. It was a gray November day, and a cold wind lashed through the terminal windows. Passengers had settled into their seats. The economy class was packed, the smell of cold coffee mingling with the familiar metallic scent of the airplane cabin. In the back row seat, 36C, a black man sat quietly. He wore an old dark brown jacket with a slightly frayed collar, dark jeans. His leather shoes were not shiny but clean. In his hand was a small, soft leather briefcase without a logo or brand name. It rested neatly on his lap, as if he didn't want to bother anyone. His name is Marcus Reed. Marcus didn't look around, no scrutinizing, no annoyance. He just sat there back in his seat, hands clasped together, his gaze calmly fixed on the space in front of him. He looked like hundreds of other economy class passengers, tired, silent, hoping for the flight to depart soon. Until that voice rang out. "Hey, sir, I'm talking to you." A deep, clear voice echoed from the front of the cabin, cutting through the background noise. Marcus instinctively looked up, not out of fear, but out of politeness. He looked straight ahead. A white man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered. His pilot's uniform was so perfectly pressed it was almost stiff. The 4 gold stripes on his epaulets gleamed in the cabin lights. "That's Captain Ryan Caldwell." He didn't move closer. He stood about 10 feet away from Marcus, far enough to maintain his authority, but close enough for everyone in the economy class to hear every word. "That briefcase," Caldwell said, pointing directly at Marcus. "You mustn't have it on your lap during takeoff." Marcus looked down at his briefcase. Then he looked up. "Yes, sir," he said softly. "I'm waiting for the flight attendant to return. I intend to leave it under the seat in front of me." Caldwell narrowed his eyes. A thin, cold smile appeared on his lips. "No," he said. "You'll have to check it." Marcus paused slightly. Just a single breath. "Sir," he said, his voice even. "My ticket allows me to bring one personal bag. It fits within the standard." Caldwell chuckled softly. Not a laugh of joy. It was the kind of sound one makes when they've decided not to consider the other person as an equal. "Economy passengers," he said louder, loud enough for the surrounding seats to hear, "always think the rules don't apply to them." Several passengers turned their heads. Some frowned. Others avoided Marcus's gaze, as if unwilling to get involved. Marcus felt a familiar sensation welling up in his chest. Not anger, not shame, just weariness. He'd heard that tone of voice his whole life. He took a slow breath. "Captain," Marcus said, "I was just following the flight attendant's instructions. I wasn't causing any obstruction." Caldwell took another step. His leather shoes clattered loudly on the cabin floor. "You're getting in the way," he said. "And frankly, I don't have time for this kind of thing." He glanced quickly at Marcus's old jacket, the unbranded briefcase, the last row of seats. Then, he said something that sent the entire economy class into silence. "If you want to be treated like first class," Caldwell said sarcastically, "then you should pay for first class." Nobody said anything. No one objected. Marcus felt the eyes on him. Some were filled with pity, some with curiosity, some with judgment. He looked down at his hands. Hands that had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Hands that had held the power to decide the livelihoods of tens of thousands of people. He gently clenched his fingers. Then he relaxed them. He looked up, staring directly at Caldwell. "Okay," Marcus said. "I'll do as you ask." Caldwell smirked as if he had just won a small, insignificant game of chess. "Good," he said. "Remember, next time on this plane, I'm the one who makes the decisions." He turned away, leaving behind a suffocatingly heavy economy class cabin. Marcus slowly bent down and placed his briefcase under the seat in front of him. He did everything carefully and slowly. Not out of fear, but because he was restraining himself. Because a question had begun to form in his mind. If I remain silent today, how many other people will continue to be treated like this? The plane vibrated slightly as the engine started. And no one in economy class knew that the man in seat 36C had just made a decision that would change the fate of at least 2 people on that flight. It's just not the right time yet. After Captain Ryan Caldwell turned his back and walked towards the cockpit, the economy class fell into an eerie silence. This wasn't the usual silence of passengers waiting for their plane to taxi. It was a heavy silence where everyone could hear their own heartbeat, but no one wanted to speak. Marcus Reed sat upright in seat 36C. His seatbelt was fastened. His small leather briefcase now rested neatly under the seat in front of him. He placed his hands on his lap, his head slightly bowed, his gaze fixed on the space between the 2 rows of seats. Outside, the window baggage carts moved slowly along the runway. Yellow lights flickered, a world operating steadily, coldly indifferent to the minor disturbances inside the aircraft cabin. Marcus sensed the gazes from all around him. It didn't last long, just a few seconds, but it was enough for him to realize how familiar that gaze was. The white woman in seat 36B subtly shifted, creating more distance between them. It was unclear whether this was due to discomfort or an unconscious desire for greater safety. A middle-aged man in the seat in front glanced quickly over his shoulder, then immediately turned away. Nobody said anything. Nobody asked if Marcus was okay. And Marcus didn't expect that. He had become accustomed to being someone who didn't exist. 30 years ago, in a small town in Mississippi, Marcus used to sit at the back of the classroom. Not because he was a poor student, but because the teacher thought this kid is better suited to sitting at the back. At 16, when he went into an electronics store with a white classmate, the salesperson always looked at his friend first, even though Marcus was the one who asked the question. When Marcus first walked into the boardroom of a major New York investment fund, the receptionist handed him a list of job applicants instead of the CEO's guest pass. Those things didn't trigger an outburst of anger. They accumulate. Calm down. It creates an outer layer of calmness and a deep inner strength. Marcus isn't the type to react immediately. He's the observant type. A young brunette flight attendant wearing a name tag that read Emily Carter walked down the aisle checking seatbelts. As she approached row 36, she paused briefly. "Sir," she whispered to Marcus, her voice slightly hesitant. I'm sorry about what happened earlier." Marcus looked up at her. His gaze held neither reproach nor pity. "It's all right," he replied. "She's just doing her job." Emily pursed her lips, as if wanting to say something more, then stopped. She nodded slightly and continued walking. That brief moment reminded Marcus of something. The system isn't run by people like Emily. It's run by people like Ryan Caldwell. Those who believe they are the system. The loudspeaker blared the chief flight attendant's voice announcing that the plane was preparing for taxiing. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath of the distinctive cabin air. A stream of thoughts began to flow slowly through his mind. What will I do this time? Marcus had been in similar situations before. Sometimes he chose to ignore it. Sometimes he spoke up. But today was different. It wasn't because Caldwell's insults were more severe than anything he had ever experienced. It was because it happened in front of so many people. The children sit in the middle row. The elderly sit in the front. Economy passengers are used to being treated like second or third class. If Marcus reacts with anger today, he will become the out-of-control black man. If he remains completely silent, everything will continue as before. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked down at the leather briefcase under the seat. Nothing flashy inside, no cash. No designer goods. Just a slim laptop, a notebook, and an encrypted phone. But that phone connected directly to a world Captain Ryan Caldwell knew nothing about. Marcus took out his phone. The screen lit up. No social media notifications. No promotional emails. There is only one secure messaging app. He didn't type right away. He looked around once more. Caldwell returned to the cockpit. The cabin gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The chatter subsided. A few passengers put on headphones and closed their eyes to rest. Marcus typed a short line. AA 417. Dallas to Chicago, Captain Ryan Caldwell. He paused. His finger hovered over the screen. He recalled his father's words from years ago when Marcus was a young, resentful man. You don't need to win every argument. But if you have the power to change the rules, make sure you do it for the benefit of more people than for your own ego. Marcus continued typing. There are signs of abuse of power and inappropriate behavior toward economy class passengers. I will report the details after landing. He sent it. There was no expression of satisfaction. There was no sense of retaliation. It was just a sensible decision. The plane began to move. A gentle thrust pressed Marcus into his seat. Outside the window, the runway receded. The economy class compartment vibrates as the wheels leave the ground. Marcus looked out the city of Dallas shrinking below. Straight streets, regular rows of buildings, an order built on unseen rules, he wondered. Did Ryan Caldwell ever consider that there are rules that are bigger than his cockpit? Marcus leaned his head back against the chair. He closed his eyes. Not to escape, but we need to prepare. Because he knew this wasn't over yet. Not in Dallas. Not above 30,000 feet. And certainly not in the way Captain Ryan Caldwell is imagining. After Captain Ryan Caldwell turned his back and walked towards the cockpit, the economy class fell into an eerie silence. This wasn't the usual silence of passengers waiting for their plane to taxi. It was a heavy silence where everyone could hear their own heartbeat, but no one wanted to speak. Marcus Reed sat upright in seat 36C. His seatbelt was fastened. His small leather briefcase now rested neatly under the seat in front of him. He placed his hands on his lap, his head slightly bowed, his gaze fixed on the space between the two rows of seats. Outside the window, baggage carts moved slowly along the runway. Yellow lights flickered, a world operating steadily, coldly indifferent to the minor disturbances inside the aircraft cabin. Marcus sensed the gazes from all around him. It didn't last long, just a few seconds, but it was enough for him to realize how familiar that gaze was. The white woman in seat 36B subtly shifted, creating more distance between them. It was unclear whether this was due to discomfort or an unconscious desire for greater safety. A middle-aged man in the seat in front glanced quickly over his shoulder, then immediately turned away. Nobody said anything. Nobody asked if Marcus was okay. And Marcus didn't expect that. He had become accustomed to being someone who didn't exist. 30 years ago, in a small town in Mississippi, Marcus used to sit at the back of the classroom. Not because he was a poor student, but because the teacher thought this kid is better suited to sitting at the back. At 16, when he went into an electronics store with a white classmate, the salesperson always looked at his friend first, even though Marcus was the one who asked the question. When Marcus first walked into the boardroom of a major New York investment fund, the receptionist handed him a list of job applicants instead of the CEO's guest pass. Those things didn't trigger an outburst of anger. They accumulate. Calm down. It creates an outer layer of calmness and a deep inner strength. Marcus isn't the type to react immediately. He's the observant type. A young brunette flight attendant, wearing a name tag that read Emily Carter, walked down the aisle checking seatbelts. As she approached row 36, she paused briefly. "Sir," she whispered to Marcus, her voice slightly hesitant. I'm sorry about what happened earlier." Marcus looked up at her. His gaze held neither reproach nor pity. "It's all right," he replied. "She's just doing her job." Emily pursed her lips as if wanting to say something more, then stopped. She nodded slightly and continued walking. That brief moment reminded Marcus of something. The system isn't run by people like Emily. It's run by people like Ryan Caldwell. Those who believe they are the system. The loudspeaker blared the chief flight attendant's voice announcing that the plane was preparing for taxiing. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath of the distinctive cabin air. A stream of thoughts began to flow slowly through his mind. What will I do this time? Marcus had been in similar situations before. Sometimes he chose to ignore it. Sometimes he spoke up. But today was different. It wasn't because Caldwell's insults were more severe than anything he had ever experienced. It was because it happened in front of so many people. The children sit in the middle row. The elderly sit in the front. Economy passengers are used to being treated like second or third class. If Marcus reacts with anger today, he will become the out-of-control black man. If he remains completely silent, everything will continue as before. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked down at the leather briefcase under the seat. Nothing flashy inside. No cash, no designer goods, just a slim laptop, a notebook, and an encrypted phone. But that phone connected directly to a world Captain Ryan Caldwell knew nothing about. Marcus took out his phone. The screen lit up. No social media notifications. No promotional emails. There is only one secure messaging app. He didn't type right away. He looked around once more. Caldwell returned to the cockpit. The cabin gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The chatter subsided. A few passengers put on headphones and closed their eyes to rest. Marcus typed a short line. AA 417. Dallas to Chicago. Captain Ryan Caldwell. He paused. His finger hovered over the screen. He recalled his father's words from years ago when Marcus was a young, resentful man. You don't need to win every argument. But if you have the power to change the rules, make sure you do it for the benefit of more people than for your own ego. Marcus continued typing. There are signs of abuse of power and inappropriate behavior toward economy class passengers. I will report the details after landing. He sent it. There was no expression of satisfaction. There was no sense of retaliation. It was just a sensible decision. The plane began to move. A gentle thrust pressed Marcus into his seat. Outside the window, the runway receded. The economy class compartment vibrates as the wheels leave the ground. Marcus looked out the city of Dallas, shrinking below. Straight streets, regular rows of buildings. An order built on unseen rules, he wondered. Did Ryan Caldwell ever consider that there are rules that are bigger than his cockpit? Marcus leaned his head back against the chair. He closed his eyes. Not to escape, but we need to prepare. Because he knew this wasn't over yet. Not in Dallas. Not above 30000 feet. And certainly not in the way Captain Ryan Caldwell is imagining. Flight AA 417 stabilized at altitude. The seatbelt sign went off. The economy class began to transition from a tense atmosphere to the familiar rhythms of everyday life. A flight attendant pushed a drinks cart down the aisle. The ice clinked against the plastic cups. The aroma of hot coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the familiar metallic and carpeted scents of the floor. Marcus Reed observed everything with the calm gaze of someone accustomed to watching the system work from the inside. He noticed the subtle details. The way the flight attendants lingered longer in first class. The way their voices lowered when speaking to passengers there. The way they became more concise and procedural when entering economy class. There was no obvious malice. It was just a habit, and Marcus understood that it was precisely these kinds of habits that were the hardest to change. Emily Carter returned to seat 36. She smiled and handed Marcus a glass of water. "Would you like water or soda, sir?" she asked. "Water, please," Marcus replied. She handed over the glass of water, then paused for half a second, as if considering something. "The flight today is a bit crowded," Emily said, lowering her voice. "Everyone's tired." Marcus nodded. "I know. You've worked hard." Emily let out a soft sigh, as if that remark allowed her to release some of her tension. She nodded, then pushed the cart onward. Marcus watched. He thought of the internal meetings at North Star Strategic Group, where he often asked a question that many managers disliked. What kind of pressure are those on the front lines facing? The system, when viewed from above, always appears neat and tidy. But at the lower levels where people interact directly, the system reveals its flaws. At the front of the cabin, the cockpit door was closed. But Captain Ryan Caldwell's voice occasionally rang out through the loudspeaker. Confident, calm, without a hint of hesitation. Marcus listened to that voice with particular attention. It's not about finding flaws. It's about understanding the thinking behind it. Caldwell talked about the weather, the flight path, and the estimated landing time. Everything was up to standard, right on paper, right on procedure, a skilled pilot. And that's what made Marcus see the problem more clearly. People like Ryan Caldwell don't think of themselves as bad guys. They believe they're maintaining order, that if they weren't strict, the system would fall apart. Marcus has encountered this type of thinking many times in the executive world. We do it for efficiency. We don't have time for emotions. The law is the law. But which law? Is it a written law or a law applied at will? Marcus recalled a meeting a few years ago when North Star was considering investing in a transport company. The report showed all the indicators were good. But when Marcus went to survey the site, he spoke with drivers, warehouse staff, and the night shift security guard. They told him things that weren't in the report. Times they've been yelled at. Long, unpaid shifts. Flexible regulations that only applied to the disadvantaged. Marcus refused the deal. It's not because profits aren't enough. It's because the culture has rotted away. The steady hum of the plane's engines brought Marcus back to reality. He looked around the economy class once more. The people here didn't know each other, but they shared one thing in common. They are not a priority. A man in seat 35 stood up, trying to open the overhead compartment to retrieve his jacket. He fumbled for a few seconds. The compartment was jammed. Another flight attendant, Laura Mitchell, stepped forward. "Sir, please sit down," she said quickly. "We'll assist you later." The man looked embarrassed, apologized, and sat down. No major issue. But Marcus noticed the way Laura spoke. Fast, stiff, appropriate. Marcus wondered if the voice would have sounded different if the person who stood up had been a first-class passenger. At the front of the cabin, the cockpit doors swung open. Captain Ryan Caldwell stepped out, a cup of coffee in hand. He walked down the aisle with the confident air of someone in control. A few passengers looked up. Some offered a polite smile. Others avoided eye contact. Caldwell stopped near seat 34 and exchanged a quick word with Laura. His voice was low enough that no one could hear, but close enough for Marcus to sense his tone. "Keep them seated," Caldwell nodded. "We're not running a bus." Laura nodded. "Yes, Captain." Caldwell turned his head. His gaze swept across the economy class, like someone looking at a to-do list. When his eyes landed on Marcus in seat 36C, it paused for a moment. Just a very short beat. No words. No gestures. But Marcus realized that. It wasn't a curious look. Nor was it hostile. That's the look of someone who believes they've put things in the right order. Caldwell turned and went back to the cockpit. Marcus took a sip of water. Cold. Distinctly mineral. He felt his throat soothe. In his mind, the pieces gradually began to connect. A system where power has been vested in the same type of person for too long. A culture where strictness is mistaken for respect. An environment where small, repetitive behaviors become the normal. Marcus didn't blame Emily. He didn't blame Laura. He wasn't just targeting Ryan Caldwell either. He was thinking about something bigger. If you weren't here today, if no one were to take notes, report, or ask questions, what would happen? No scandal. No consequences. Only one more economy class passenger feels a little smaller. Marcus set the glass of water down on the tray. He opened his phone and reviewed the message he had sent. There was no new reply, and he didn't expect that right now. Everything takes time. Outside the window, the clouds drifted slowly, thick and heavy. Sunlight reflected off the airplane wing, creating constantly shifting patches of light and shadow. Marcus knew that once the plane landed, things wouldn't be as simple as they were now. Systems that are accustomed to operating in the dark don't like being exposed to light. And those who believe they are unchallengeable are often the ones who react most strongly when it happens. Marcus leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. He didn't seek conflict, but he didn't avoid it either. Because somewhere very soon a moment will come. The moment Ryan Caldwell will be forced to confront a question he never considered. If I'm not the most powerful person here, then who am I? Inside the cockpit of Flight AA-417, the soft lighting and illuminated control panel resembled a miniature city. The numbers were steady. The flight path was clear. Everything was operating exactly as Ryan Caldwell had expected. Caldwell placed his coffee cup on the tray, adjusted his headphones, and glanced quickly at the indicators. For him, this was familiar territory. A space where everything was in order. Where his orders were the end of all debate. "The altitude is stable," the co-pilot said. "Leave it as is," Caldwell replied, his voice curt. Ryan Caldwell has been flying for over 20 years, from short Midwest flights to long transcontinental voyages. He grew up in a family with a military tradition. His father was an officer, and his grandfather was a test pilot. Discipline, order, and hierarchy were ingrained in Caldwell from a very young age. At the Caldwell house, nobody asks why. It's just do it. When Ryan entered aviation, he carried that philosophy with him. He learned very quickly. He flew very steadily. Not the flashy kind of pilot, but the kind of pilot that superiors trusted to take on high-demand, high-pressure flights. Caldwell isn't flashy, one manager once said. He keeps everything under control, and Caldwell believed in that. He believed that passengers needed to be regulated, that if they weren't strictly controlled, the situation would escalate. That the economy was the most likely place for problems to arise because people always think they deserve more than the money they pay. Caldwell didn't think he was being discriminatory. He thought he was being realistic. Upon stepping out of the cockpit and seeing the black man in seat 36C with a small leather briefcase on his lap, Caldwell made a quick judgment, not out of malice, but out of habit. Economy. Last compartment. Unbranded bags. May cause delays. In Caldwell's mind, everything was organized according to invisible labels. These labels helped him make decisions quickly, and he was proud of that ability. He didn't know Marcus Reed's name, and he didn't think he needed to know. After returning to the cockpit, Caldwell felt a small sense of satisfaction. Not big, not dramatic, just the feeling that everything was in place. It's a small matter, he thought. Small, repetitive events have shaped the person Caldwell is today. Caldwell recalled an incident a few years ago when an economy-class passenger complained about their seat. He had security escort the passenger off the plane. Afterward, the flight departed on time. No press. No trouble. Caldwell learned a simple lesson. Being firm makes things go smoothly, and each time that belief was further strengthened. In the cockpit, Caldwell glanced at his watch. The scheduled landing time was still correct. He adjusted the controls as if to confirm once again that he was in control. Economy passengers, he thought, are always a variable. Caldwell didn't realize that it was precisely that mindset that was the biggest variable. In the aft compartment, Marcus Reed was observing what Caldwell would never see from the cockpit. But at that moment, Caldwell didn't know that. He opened the microphone, preparing a short announcement. His voice was deep, clear, and had the tone of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell said, "we will continue our journey smoothly. Please follow the flight crew's instructions." He switched off the microphone and turned to the co-pilot. "Keep them seated," Caldwell said softly. "I don't want any more trouble." The co-pilot nodded. No objection. In the cockpit, the hierarchy was very clear. Caldwell leaned back in his chair and took a sip of coffee. He felt he was doing the right thing. If someone were to tell Caldwell that, in just a few hours, all those beliefs would crumble, he would laugh heartily. Because in Caldwell's world, power always comes with title. And he's sitting in the top seat on this plane. In the back, the economy-class cabin vibrated slightly as the plane entered an area of turbulence. A few passengers flinched. There was a faint clatter of furniture. Caldwell made a slight adjustment to the steering wheel. Everything quickly settled down. "See," he thought. "Control." But Caldwell didn't know that there are types of interference that don't show up on radar. The distractions come from people, from the silence, from decisions made far away in the cockpit. Caldwell looked at the dashboard. The numbers were still neat. The lines were still straight. He smiled confidently. And it was within that confidence that a gap opened up. Not big, not noisy. But that was enough for things to start spiraling out of Ryan Caldwell's control. The plane shuddered slightly once more as it passed through a band of turbulent air. The faint clinking of plastic, a few gasps of breath, and then silences filled the air. The economy-class ceiling lights dimmed as if trying to soothe the building up of invisible tensions. Marcus Reed remained seated in seat 36C. He rested his hand on the armrest, feeling the steady vibrations emanating from the seat frame. For many, it was just the familiar sensation of a flight. For Marcus, it was the rhythm of a system operating and beginning to malfunction. The beverage cart had passed. Emily Carter and Laura Mitchell divided the aisles. They worked quickly, efficiently, and according to procedure. But Marcus noticed a subtle change. Their eyes frequently glanced towards the front of the compartment, as if waiting for some kind of signal. A man in row 35 raised his hand to call a flight attendant for a blanket. Emily responded with a polite smile but said, "Please wait a moment, sir." She turned away, then quickly returned, handing him a neatly folded blanket. Everything was fine. until Captain Ryan Caldwell reappears. The cockpit door opened. Caldwell stepped out this time without coffee. He walked slowly, his gait deliberate. His eyes scanned the economy class like someone checking a list. Marcus sensed the change in atmosphere even before Caldwell stopped near seat 36. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell said, his voice loud enough for several rows of seats to hear. "I repeat, during this period, please limit movement. We need to ensure safety and adherence to schedules." There was nothing wrong with the statement itself, but the way Caldwell said it, harsh, decisive, made it sound like a warning. A woman in row 34 apologized softly and straightened up. Another man adjusted his seatbelt. The economy class quickly became quieter. Caldwell turned to Laura Mitchell. "Is anyone standing up unnecessarily?" "No," Captain Laura replied. Caldwell nodded. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he looked toward the back of the compartment. His gaze settled on Marcus Reed. "Sir," Caldwell said, pointing. "Your briefcase. I want to make sure it's in the right place." Marcus looked down. The leather briefcase was still neatly tucked under the front seat, not sticking out, not getting in the way. "It's in place," Captain Marcus replied. His voice was calm. Caldwell smirked. "I'll be the one to decide what's right." A few passengers turned their heads. Some frowned. Some lowered their heads. Marcus felt a very thin layer of heat run down his spine. Not anger, but the familiar feeling of being defined by someone else. He looked up, meeting Caldwell's gaze. "If there are specific safety concerns, I'm willing to cooperate." Caldwell took another step, closing the distance between them. "The safety issue is, I say yes." The economy class compartment was eerily silent. Emily Carter stood a few rows away. She looked at Marcus, then at Caldwell. Her lips were pressed together. Laura Mitchell bowed her head, her hands gripping the drinks cart tightly. Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand." Caldwell paused for a moment. Perhaps he was waiting for a protest, a rebuttal, but Marcus gave him none. "That's good," Caldwell said, his voice slightly higher. "We don't need any more trouble." He turned away. The sound of his leather shoes leaving the area around seat 36 was louder than necessary. As soon as Caldwell disappeared into the aisle, soft sighs of relief began to spread. The economy class seemed to have held its breath collectively. Marcus looked down at his hands. His knuckles were slightly white from clenching them tightly without realizing it. "Relax. Take a deep breath." "Not now," he told himself. A boy in row 37 looked over at Marcus with a curious gaze. His mother pulled his arm and whispered something. The boy turned away. Marcus understood. No blame. Sometimes fear spreads faster than words. About 10 minutes later, the loudspeaker blared again. It was Caldwell's voice, familiar and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are entering an area of mild turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The warning light came on. Several passengers who were standing hurriedly returned to their seats. Emily and Laura quickly tidied up the bus and found safe seats. Marcus fastened his seatbelt. The plane shook more violently than before. A small clatter was heard as a water bottle rolled off the tray. Emily, struggling to maintain her balance near row 35, slipped. In an instant, she tumbled forward. Marcus instinctively jumped to his feet. He reached out and caught Emily's arm, preventing her from falling down the aisle. "Be careful," he said, his voice low. Emily gasped for breath. Thank you, sir." At that very moment, Caldwell appeared at the front of the compartment. "What happened?" he shouted. "The plane was shaking." Emily began. Caldwell didn't let her finish. His gaze was fixed on Marcus. "What did you just do?" Caldwell asked. "I caught her," Marcus replied. "The plane was shaking." "Sit down," Caldwell said menacingly. "Now." Marcus complied. He sat down and fastened his seatbelt. Emily opened her mouth. "Captain," Silence, Caldwell interrupted. "Go back to your seat." Emily looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with bewilderment. She turned away and hurried back to the flight attendant's seat. The economy class compartment vibrated a few more times, then gradually stabilized. The warning light remained on. Caldwell stood there looking at Marcus for another second. Something had changed in his eyes. It was no longer just control. It was suspicion. "After we land," Caldwell said, his voice slow and clear, "I'll need to report on that behavior." Marcus looked up. "A report about helping a flight attendant avoid falling." "Report of noncompliance with flight crew instructions," Caldwell replied. "We'll let security decide." A wave of hushed whispers spread through the economy class cabin. No one spoke aloud, but everyone understood the implication. Marcus felt his heart rate quicken slightly, not from fear, but because he realized something important. He's escalating the situation. It's no longer a reminder. It's no longer symbolic authority. Caldwell is laying the groundwork for an accusation. Marcus looked directly at Caldwell. "I'm willing to cooperate and explain." Caldwell smirked. "We'll talk later." He turned and walked quickly back to the cockpit. The seatbelt warning light went off a few minutes later. The economy class gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere was different. Marcus leaned back in his chair. He felt it more clearly than ever a line had been crossed. It wasn't because of him. It was because of Ryan Caldwell. Marcus opened his phone. Not in a hurry. Not panicking. He reopened the secure messaging app. He typed slowly, one letter at a time. Escalation. There are indications that the allegations are unfounded. The witness is a flight attendant. He sent it. Then he locked the screen. Marcus looked out the window. The clouds were thicker. The light was fading. Somewhere ahead, the city of Chicago awaited. And with it came a confrontation that no one in this economy class, not even Ryan Caldwell, was really prepared for. Following Captain Ryan Caldwell's threat to report the incident, the economy class was no longer the same. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt a new tension settling over the cramped seats. Marcus Reed sat silently in seat 36C. His seatbelt was draped across his chest. His hands rested neatly on his laps. He gazed straight ahead at the gray, fabric-covered seat bearing the marks of thousands of previous flights. He knew he was standing at the crossroads of a choice. A familiar choice, but never easy. "Stop here," a voice whispered in his head. "Let things blow over. No need to make a big deal out of it. No need to get hurt." Marcus knew that road very well. He had traveled it many times. He left the plane in silence, sent a private email, and let everything be handled internally. No fuss, no press, no controversy. A clean ending for him personally. But each time Marcus was left with a heavy feeling that lasted for days. He remembered one evening in Chicago a few years ago. He was sitting alone in his office, looking down at the brightly lit Michigan Avenue. A young colleague had asked him, "Do you ever get tired of always having to be the one to restrain yourself?" Marcus was silent for a long time. Then, he answered, "Yes. But being tired isn't a reason to turn your back." Now, at an altitude of 30,000 feet, that question came back to him clearer than ever. If I take another step, Marcus thought, what will happen? An official report, an investigation, unwanted attention, and then headlines can appear in ways he can't control. Marcus wasn't afraid of the spotlight. He was used to living under the public's gaze. But he understood the price of public attention, not just for himself, but for those around him. Emily Carter, Laura Mitchell, young flight attendants working within a system where they have no say in the matter. If everything comes to light, they will be the first to face the pressure. Marcus tilted his head and closed his eyes. He let the steady hum of the engine become the background sound for his thoughts. He remembered his father, a man of few words who had worked his entire life in a repair shop in Mississippi. His father had once said, "You can bow your head to pass through the wind, but if you always bow your head, you will forget what the sky looks like." Marcus opened his eyes. He glanced over at seat 37. The little boy who had been coloring earlier was now asleep, his head resting on his mother's shoulder. The mother pulled her thin jacket over him, a small, instinctive gesture. At row 35, the middle-aged man subtly turned his wrist, checking his watch. His gaze swept over Marcus, lingered for a moment, then turned away. No malice, just caution. Marcus understood. When someone is labeled a troublemaker, others will keep their distance. He doesn't blame them. He wondered, if he remained silent, what would be taught to that boy? That power is always right. That those who speak up will get into trouble. Marcus didn't want to be a bad example. The phone in my shirt pocket vibrated gently again. A message from David Holloway. "Are you sure Caldwell has a protected history? I don't want you drawn into an unnecessary conflict." Marcus read slowly word by word. David wasn't wrong. Ryan Caldwell wasn't a newcomer. He had a clean flying record and years of experience. In a system that valued performance and punctuality, Caldwell was an asset. Marcus typed a reply. "I'm sure. But I don't want to hurt those who have no choice. He paused, then added, if this goes too far, protect the flight attendants. Especially Emily Carter. The message sent appeared. Marcus put the phone down. A part of him felt lighter. Not because he had made his choice, but because he had acknowledged his fear. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Marcus thought. It's about acting when you're afraid. The loudspeaker blared. Captain Ryan Caldwell's voice announced the start of the descent, preparing to approach Chicago. His voice was confident, as if nothing out there could reach his position. Marcus listened not with anger, but with clarity. He believed he was safe, Marcus thought. And that was when the danger was greatest. He opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. In his mind, the next steps were becoming clearer. No need for immediate exposure. No need for a noisy confrontation. Rather, it's about letting things reveal themselves at the right time, in the right place, with sufficient evidence. Marcus placed his hand on the seatbelt, tightened it slightly, then released it, a small gesture, but decisive. He knew that from this moment on he had crossed the point of no return. Not because of Ryan Caldwell, but because of those who have no choice but to remain silent. Outside the window, the clouds thinned out. The lights of Chicago began to appear like scattered points of light in the darkness. Marcus looked down, a strange sense of calm washing over him. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking clarity. And very soon that clarity will come not in thought but in action. The plane began to descend. The cabin pressure changed only slightly enough for a few people to swallow, enough for someone's ears to ring for a moment. The lights of Chicago came into view more clearly through the window's straight, cold lines of light, like an emotionless map. Marcus Reed fastened his seatbelt. He could feel his heartbeat steady, slow, controlled. Not because he wasn't worried, but because he had accepted what was to come. The loudspeaker blared. This time it wasn't a generic announcement. Captain Ryan Caldwell's voice was deeper and shorter. Cabin crew, please take your seats. Emily Carter was standing near row 34, preparing to clear the trays. She glanced up at the head of the cabin, her eyes briefly tense. She nodded to Laura Mitchell, then quickly returned to her seat as a flight attendant. As she passed Marcus, she paused for a split second, a very brief moment, just long enough for him to see the worried look in her eyes. Marcus nodded slightly. He said nothing. It was a small gesture, but enough for Emily to understand that she wasn't alone. The plane vibrated slightly as it descended. A faint metallic hum echoed, then subsided. The economy class was unusually quiet. The whispers had vanished. Everyone seemed to realize at the same time that something unusual was happening. The cockpit door opened. Captain Ryan Caldwell stepped out. This time, he didn't stop at the front of the compartment. He walked straight to the rear, his steps quick and decisive. His gaze didn't sweep across the room, as before it locked onto his target. Marcus Reed, Sir Caldwell said, stopping in the aisle next to seat 36. After landing, you will remain on the plane. A very faint murmur spread through the room. Someone in seat 35 turned their head. The woman in 36B subtly tightened her grip on her handbag. Marcus looked up. Is there a specific reason? Captain Caldwell lowered his voice, but it was clear enough for those nearby to hear. There have been reports of non-compliance with flight crew instructions, and of inappropriate contact with flight attendants during turbulence. The atmosphere felt frozen. Emily Carter sprang up from her flight attendant's seat. Captain, sit down, Caldwell said without looking at her. We'll deal with this later. Emily froze for a moment, then slowly sat down. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair tightly. Marcus looked at Caldwell. His eyes held no anger, no pleading, just the intense concentration of someone listening to a grave accusation. I deny it, Marcus said. I was there to help her when she almost fell. There are witnesses. Caldwell chuckled softly, a short, unhappy laugh. We'll let airport security decide. He turned away, leaving a single sentence hanging in the air. The economy class was no longer silent. But the sounds that did escape were suppressed, gasping breaths, mumbled incomplete sentences. No one stood up. No one intervened. Marcus understood. When power speaks with certainty, the majority often choose safety. He looked down at his hands. Once. Then he opened his phone. The secure messaging app lit up. Marcus typed slowly and clearly. Caldwell has filed a formal complaint. Request for security intervention after landing. Witnesses Emily Carter, Laura Mitchell. Request for legal and operational representation at the gate. He sent it. The message was marked received. Marcus locked his screen. He leaned back in his seat. In the seat in front of him, the middle-aged man turned to look at him this time without avoiding his gaze. His eyes were full of hesitation. Are you? All right, the man asked very softly. Marcus nodded. I'm fine. Thank you. The man nodded in return, then turned away. A small gesture, but to Marcus it meant something. The plane descended further. The cabin lights switched to the preparation for landing mode. The landing gear was released a deep, heavy, unmistakable sound. Caldwell stood at the front of the compartment, his hands gripping the seat. He looked straight ahead, no longer at Marcus. But there was something unusually tense about his posture. He believes he's right, Marcus thought, and he believes the system will be on his side. The plane's wheels touched down on the runway. A firm touch. The cabin vibrated. Scattered applause broke, and then died down. The atmosphere didn't allow for celebration. The plane taxied. Usually, this is when everyone breathes a sigh of relief. But today, the weight dragged on uncomfortably. The plane didn't head straight towards the jet bridge. It veered onto another branch, slowed down, and then stopped at an unfamiliar location. The red and green lights reflected off the aircraft's fuselage. A louder murmur spread. What's going on? Why aren't you going through the gate? There's security. Marcus looked out the window. Two airport security vehicles were parked near the bottom of the stairs. Further away, a black SUV stood still, its engine still running. Caldwell turned around and switched on the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, please remain seated. Airport security will be boarding the plane to handle a matter. Many eyes immediately turned towards the back of the compartment. Marcus sensed the pressure not from Caldwell, but from the collective gaze. It wasn't exactly hostile. It was a mixture of curiosity and fear. Fear that this incident would slow them down. Fear of being implicated. The airplane door opened. Cold air rushed in. Two security officers stepped aboard. They were wearing dark uniforms and had neutral expressions on their faces. Caldwell stepped forward, speaking quickly and softly. One of the two security officers nodded, then looked along the compartment. His gaze stopped at seat 36. Sir, the security guard said to Marcus. Please stand up. Marcus stood up. He did so slowly with control. He raised his arms above his shoulders, not out of fear, but so that no one could say he was uncooperative. Emily Carter sprang up from her flight attendant seat. I'm a witness, she said, her voice trembling but clear. He did nothing wrong. Caldwell spun around. Emily, this isn't the time. The security guard raised his hand. We'll take note of that later. Marcus stood upright, looking directly at the security officer. I'm willing to cooperate, but I want to know specifically what the charges are. The security guard looked at the handheld device. He hesitated for a moment. The charges are failure to follow instructions and inappropriate contact with a flight attendant, he read. Marcus nodded. I deny it, and I have representatives on their way. Caldwell frowned. A representative, you're complicating things. Marcus looked directly at Caldwell. No, I'm clarifying the matter. A heavy silence fell over the aircraft cabin. Security personnel exchanged quick glances. We'll ask him to come outside to discuss, this one person said. Marcus nodded. Okay. He stepped out into the hallway. Eyes followed him this time, without flinching. Some bowed their heads. Some looked straight ahead. As Marcus reached the airplane door, he paused for a second, turning back to look at Emily Carter. Thank you, he said softly. Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Marcus walked down the stairs. The cold Chicago air hit his face. He could see the black SUV more clearly. The rear door opened. A man in a dark coat stepped down. Tall, salt and pepper hair. Sharp, focused eyes. The security personnel slowed down. The other man looked directly at Marcus. And in that moment, Marcus knew the real battle was about to begin. The Chicago air was cold and dry, whipping against Marcus Reed's face as he descended the final flight of stairs. The airport's white lights illuminated the gray concrete, making everything appear flat and rigid like an emotionless report. Two security officers walked on either side of Marcus. No handcuffs, no shoving, but close enough to remind him that at this moment he was no longer completely free. The black SUV was parked a few dozen feet from the plane. The man who had just gotten out of the car stood still, his hands in his coat pockets. A gentle breeze stirred the hem of his coat. Marcus looked at him, trying to read his expression. This man didn't look like airport security. He didn't look like an airline employee. His gaze wasn't curious, not scrutinizing. It was the look of someone who already knew something. But Marcus didn't ask. He turned his head to look back at the Boeing 737. Through the economy class window, he saw faces pressed against the glass. Some were pointing, some were turning away, not wanting to see what was happening. In that moment, Marcus felt a strong sense of familiarity. Separated, set aside, treated as a problem to be dealt with. Security personnel escorted Marcus toward the SUV, but before he could take another step, one of them stopped to listen to a radio. Confirming, the man said, "His name is Marcus Reed." A moment of silence. Then he frowned. "Okay, we'll wait." Marcus noticed a subtle change in that voice. Not fear, but hesitation. But false climaxes always occur when those involved haven't yet seen any change. The SUV door opened. A man in a dark coat stepped out, extending his hand. "Mr. Reed," he said. "I am Thomas Keller." Marcus shook hands. Keller's hand was firm, dry, and unhurried. "I represent the company," Keller continued. "We'll talk in the car." Ryan Caldwell appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He walked quickly, his face tense. His pilot's uniform now looked like a suit of armor, but not as bright and shiny as it had been in the cockpit. "What's going on?" Caldwell asked, his voice sharp. "Why is he?" Keller raised his hand, interrupting. "Captain Caldwell, we'll talk later." "I was the flight commander," Caldwell said. "I reported." "And we have received the report," Keller replied calmly. "Now, please return to complete the procedures for ending your flight." Caldwell paused for a moment. His gaze shifted from Keller to Marcus. His look held a mixture of annoyance and bewilderment. Marcus said nothing. He just looked at Caldwell, his gaze neither winning nor losing. Caldwell turned and walked quickly toward the station. His figure disappeared into the lamplight. Marcus got into the SUV. The doors closed, blocking out the outside wind. The interior was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner. Thomas Keller sat opposite Marcus. Two security guards stood outside the car. "Do you understand why you're here?" Keller asked. Marcus nodded. "There's an accusation." "Yes," Keller said. "And that accusation on paper is not minor." Marcus looked directly at Keller. "But that's not right." Keller didn't immediately object. He opened an iPad and scrolled through a few lines. The blue light reflected off his face. Captain Caldwell reported that he failed to follow instructions, stood up during turbulence, and made inappropriate contact with flight attendants. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I stood up to support her when the plane shook. There are witnesses." "We've heard from Emily Carter," Keller said. "And from Laura Mitchell." Marcus nodded slightly. But Keller hadn't said the words Marcus was waiting for. "The problem," Keller continued, "is that, in most cases, the captain's report carries a great deal of weight." Marcus understood that. In a hierarchical system, the words of the leader are often considered the default truth. "If I had been a different passenger," Marcus said, his voice low, "it probably would have ended here." Keller looked at him. "Do you think so?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked out the car window. Outside, the luggage carts sped by, their lights flashing. Everything was running normally despite what had just happened. "There are so many people who have been taken off planes like me," Marcus said, "simply because they weren't believed." Keller was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Does he have legal representation?" Marcus nodded. "They're on their way." Keller put down the iPad. He leaned back in his chair, observing Marcus more closely. "He's calm," Keller said. "Very calm." Marcus smiled very slightly. "I'm used to it." At that moment, the simulated climax reached its peak. Because from an outsider's perspective, from the economy class, from the passengers, from Ryan Caldwell's point of view, Marcus Reed is the one being taken away, the one being investigated, the one in the weak position. Rumors began to spread in the station. Several passengers opened their phones. Blurry, distant photos started appearing on social media. No headlines, no context. Just images of a black man being escorted away by security. Marcus knew that. He didn't need to look at his phone to guess. He thought that just one photograph could take a completely different turn in the story. He closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, the worst-case scenarios flashed by like dark clouds drifting across the sky. He thought of his mother. Of the years he had to struggle to prove himself. Of the times he was misunderstood of being labeled. Is it worth it? Another voice asked. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked directly at Keller. I'm not asking for favoritism. I'm only asking that the truth be considered. Keller nodded slowly. That's what we want too. The car door opened. An employee handed Keller a piece of paper. Keller read it quickly, his eyebrows slightly raised, a very subtle gesture, but Marcus noticed it. Something's not right, Keller said, as if talking to himself. Some details don't fit. Marcus didn't ask. He was used to waiting. Further down in the station, Ryan Caldwell was standing and talking to a ground manager. He was gesticulating more than usual. His voice sounded louder. Caldwell believed he had done the right thing, and the system would prove it. A false climax is exactly like that. When all the signs indicate that the person who is right is losing. Marcus leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. He felt his heart rate slow down. Not yet, he thought. But it was coming. Somewhere within the newly revealed stream of data, the truth has begun to timidly surface, not yet clear enough to overturn the table, but enough to make a few people stop and take a closer look. And sometimes all it takes is one person to stop, and the whole system will start to tremble. The SUV door closed. The interior was so quiet that Marcus Reed could hear his own heartbeat steady, slow, and not panicked. Thomas Keller placed the paper he had just received on his iPad, glanced at it quickly, then looked up. His gaze was no longer neutral, as before. There was something in it that resembled recognition. Mr. Reed, Keller said, his voice low. I need to confirm a few things. Marcus nodded. Go ahead and ask. Keller took a short breath, a habit of someone about to say something important but not wanting to create drama. Marcus L. Reed, Keller read. Born in Jackson, Mississippi. Currently chairman and CEO of North Star Strategic Group. Marcus didn't react. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just kept his gaze calm. Keller continued. North Star is now the controlling shareholder of 3 regional shipping companies, and he paused, looking at the screen, has just completed a strategic stake acquisition of Aurelius Aviation Holdings. Marcus nodded slightly. Yes. Keller looked up. Aurelius is the parent company that owns our company. A moment of silence fell between them. Not long, but heavy enough. Outside the car, a security officer approached and gently tapped on the window. Keller rolled down the window. We just received confirmation from the legal department, the employee said. The information matches. Keller nodded. The window rolled up. Marcus looked at Keller. I didn't intend to say that on the plane. Keller sighed. I believe you. The truth has come to light. Not through boasting, not through business cards, but through records, the very thing the system trusts most. Across the runway in the terminal, Ryan Caldwell stood in front of the ground control manager's desk. He spoke quickly, gesturing toward the aircraft. He didn't follow instructions, Caldwell emphasized. I followed the correct procedure. The manager nodded and took notes. Another employee came over and whispered something in his ear. Caldwell stopped. What? There's an operations representative working with that passenger, the employee said. And they're requesting his records. Caldwell frowned. My file? Why? The employee swallowed hard. Because that passenger is Marcus Reed. Caldwell blinked. Once. Twice. Marcus Reed, he repeated. Who? The ground manager looked directly at Caldwell. The CEO of North Star Strategic Group. Caldwell chuckled a short, disbelieving laugh. No way. He's in seat 36C. Yes, the manager said. And that's the problem. Caldwell felt a chill run down his spine. Not fear, but disorientation. The world he understood, where power followed the epaulets, suddenly skewed. Whoever he is, Caldwell said, trying to keep his voice normal, my report is still valid. The manager nodded. We'll look into it. Inside the SUV, Keller opened another file. Mr. Reed, he said, I need to make it clear who you are doesn't change the course of the investigation. Marcus nodded. I'm not asking for any changes. Keller paused. But it allows us to see more closely. He skimmed through the entries, cabin camera footage, flight attendant testimony, turbulent timeline. Marcus listened without interrupting. There's a discrepancy, Keller said. The moment he stood up, according to the vibration data, doesn't coincide with the moment the seatbelt warning sounded. Marcus nodded. Because there was no warning at the time, Emily slipped before the alert was given. Keller looked directly at Marcus. If this is true, Captain Caldwell's report is seriously flawed. Marcus remained silent. He neither nodded nor confirmed. He let the truth speak for itself. Outside, Ryan Caldwell was invited into a makeshift office. A legal representative from the company appeared. Their voice lowered. Words like under review, investigation, and temporary began to appear in the conversation. Caldwell sat down. He stared at the white wall in front of him. For the first time that day, he felt out of control. "Just an economy passenger," Caldwell muttered. But no one responded. In the SUV, Keller received another call. He listened, nodded, and then hung up. "Mr. Reed," Keller said. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. Right here at the airport." Marcus nodded. "I'm ready." Keller looked at him more closely. "You could have avoided all of this." Marcus replied softly, "I know." "So, why didn't you do that?" Keller asked. Marcus looked out the window. The runway lights reflected off the glass, casting long streaks. "Because if I avoid it," Marcus said slowly, "everyone else will have to suffer." Keller was silent. "For a very long time. We will ensure the safety of the flight attendants," Keller said. "Especially Emily Carter." Marcus turned around and looked directly at Keller. "Thank you." In the airport hallway, Emily Carter sat on a plastic chair, her hands clutching a glass of water. Laura Mitchell sat beside her. Both were silent. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Laura asked very softly. Emily nodded, though her eyes were red. "I think this time someone is on our side." In the distance, the office door opened. Ryan Caldwell stepped out with his legal representative. His face was tense. His eyes scanned the hallway and stopped when he saw Emily. For the first time, there was no longer any confidence in his eyes. Only confusion remained. The emergency meeting took place in a glass-enclosed room overlooking the runway. The executive team connected remotely. Legal representatives presented data. Witnesses were corroborated. The timeline was reconstructed. Marcus Reed sat quietly listening. He didn't say much. When asked, he answered briefly and precisely. No one raised their voice. No one attacked. Everything proceeded exactly as a mature system should. Finally, the chairman of the council spoke up. "Captain Ryan Caldwell," a voice boomed through the loudspeaker, "will be suspended pending the conclusion of an investigation into abuse of power and false reporting." A moment of silence. "His command authority is revoked effective immediately." In the hallway, Caldwell stood motionless. His world, where power was taken for granted, had silently crumbled. Marcus stood up. He didn't smile. He didn't look at Caldwell. He just nodded to Keller. "There's one more thing," Marcus said. "I want to make sure this doesn't stop at one individual." Keller nodded. "We'll review the operational culture." Marcus looked through the glass and saw Emily and Laura. He nodded slightly at them. Emily nodded back, tears rolling down her cheeks. The climax didn't end with applause. It ended with a signed decision and a restored order. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The glass-enclosed conference room overlooking the runway gradually emptied. Remotely connected screens went off one by one. The soft creaking of chairs on the floor, the rustling of papers being neatly stacked, these small sounds signaled a decision had been made requiring no further comment. Marcus Reed stood by the window for a few more seconds. Outside, planes continued to take off and land according to schedule. The system operated non-stop regardless of the individual who had just lost power. Thomas Keller approached, maintaining a safe distance. "We will issue an internal announcement within an hour," he said. "The suspension procedure has been activated. Captain Caldwell's access card has been deactivated." Marcus nodded. "I want this done right and completely." Keller understood. He opened his iPad and quickly read through the items. "In addition to the suspension, we will open an investigation into abuse of power, false reporting, and the approach to economy passengers." "Legals are reviewing previous flights," witnesses Marcus asked. "They are protected," Keller replied immediately. "Emily Carter and Laura Mitchell will be placed on paid leave during the investigation. No one outside of legal means will have access to them." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Good." In the hallway, Ryan Caldwell sat on a metal bench. His pilot's uniform was still neat, but the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders now looked like a sarcastic reminder. He stared into the distance, his hand gripping his pilot's cap resting on his lap. A human resources manager approached. Captain Caldwell, she said in a neutral voice. Please sign to acknowledge receipt of the suspension order and hand over your access card. Caldwell looked up. I want to see a union representative. We've been notified, she replied. But the process continues. Caldwell picked up the pen. His hand trembled slightly, very slightly, but unmistakably. He signed his name. The paper was neatly folded, as was the case with all other formalities. No one raised their voice. No one insulted anyone. Only discipline matters. In another corner of the station, Emily Carter and Laura Mitchell were invited into a waiting room. A staff member offered them water and reassured them with brief words. Emily clutched the paper cup, her shoulders still trembling slightly. Did we do the right thing? Laura asked. Emily nodded, this time more confidently. Yes. The glass doors of the conference room swung open. Marcus Reed stepped out. He didn't go straight to Caldwell. He turned into another corridor where Keller was waiting. A public announcement, Marcus asked. Yes, Keller replied. But we will focus on procedures and accountability, not name the passengers. Marcus paused. I don't need to be named. Keller nodded. We don't want to take this too personally. Marcus looked through the window where Caldwell was still sitting. But individual responsibility must be clear. Keller understood. It will be clear. Internal announcements were sent out on time. Concise, accurate, emotionless. No embellishment. Captain Ryan Caldwell has been temporarily suspended from command due to procedural violations and inaccurate reporting. The airline is conducting a full investigation. We reaffirm our commitment to safety, respect for passengers, and accountability. Within minutes, the internal message spread throughout the system. In the control rooms and the later flight shifts, small conversations began to arise, not loud, but different from before. A young pilot asked his manager, "What happened?" The manager replied, "The procedure is in place." In the economy class of another flight, a flight attendant read an announcement on her phone, then looked up, her eyes pensive. She recalled the time she had been yelled at in front of passengers. This time something had changed. Marcus left the airport in silence. No press, no cameras, just the car that took him to the hotel. On the way, he checked his phone. A message from David Holloway. "It's done. The legal team appreciates how you kept things in order." Marcus replied, "Stay focused on the system." "Understood," David replied. "We'll be keeping a close eye on things." At the hotel, Marcus stood by the window looking down at the Chicago night traffic. He didn't feel the relief one usually feels after a victory. He only felt order, and order that had just been restored carefully, quietly. At the train station, Ryan Caldwell left after completing the procedures. He walked slowly, his shoulders heavy. No one saw him off. No one took his picture. Power, when it departs, makes no sound. Caldwell paused at the automatic door, turning his head to look back at the runway. Planes were still taking off. Work continued. There was no room for ego. In another office, Keller signed another document, review of economy class operational culture, objective retraining, standardization of communication, and increased independent feedback mechanisms for flight attendants and passengers. Not because of Marcus Reed, but because of what has been revealed. Late at night, Marcus received another text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for speaking up." A passenger. Marcus read it. No reply. He put the phone down. For him, justice isn't about saying thank you. It's about tomorrow. Somewhere, a person from an economy will be treated better without anyone knowing their name. The glass-enclosed conference room, overlooking the runway, gradually emptied. Remotely connected screens went off one by one. The soft creaking of chairs on the floor, and the rustling of papers being neatly stacked. These small sounds signaled a decision had been made requiring no further comment. Marcus Reed stood by the window for a few more seconds. Outside, planes continued to take off and land according to schedule. The system operated nonstop, regardless of the individual who had just lost power. Thomas Keller approached, maintaining a safe distance. "We will issue an internal announcement within an hour," he said. "The suspension procedure has been activated. Captain Caldwell's access card has been deactivated." Marcus nodded. "I want this done right and completely." Keller understood. He opened his iPad and quickly read through the items. "In addition to the suspension, we will open an investigation into abuse of power, false reporting, and the approach to economy passengers. Legals are reviewing previous flights." "Witnesses?" Marcus asked. They are protected, Keller replied immediately. Emily Carter and Laura Mitchell will be placed on paid leave during the investigation. No one outside of legal means will have access to them. Marcus exhaled slowly. Good. In the hallway, Ryan Caldwell sat on a metal bench. His pilot's uniform was still neat, but the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders now looked like a sarcastic reminder. He stared into the distance, his hand gripping his pilot's cap resting on his lap. A human resources manager approached. Captain Caldwell, she said in a neutral voice. Please sign to acknowledge receipt of the suspension order and hand over your access card. Caldwell looked up. I want to see a union representative. We've been notified, she replied. But the process continues. Caldwell picked up the pen. His hand trembled slightly, very slightly, but unmistakably. He signed his name. The paper was neatly folded, as was the case with all other formalities. No one raised their voice. No one insulted anyone. Only discipline matters. In another corner of the station, Emily Carter and Laura Mitchell were invited into a waiting room. A staff member offered them water and reassured them with brief words. Emily clutched the paper cup, her shoulders still trembling slightly. Did we do the right thing? Laura asked. Emily nodded this time more confidently. Yes. The glass doors of the conference room swung open. Marcus Reed stepped out. He didn't go straight to Caldwell. He turned into another corridor where Keller was waiting. A public announcement, Marcus asked. Yes, Keller replied. But we will focus on procedures and accountability, not name the passengers. Marcus paused. I don't need to be named. Keller nodded. We don't want to take this too personally. Marcus looked through the window where Caldwell was still sitting. But individual responsibility must be clear. Keller understood. It will be clear. Internal announcements were sent out on time. Concise, accurate, emotionless, no embellishment. Captain Ryan Caldwell has been temporarily suspended from command due to procedural violations and inaccurate reporting. The airline is conducting a full investigation. We reaffirm our commitment to safety, respect for passengers, and accountability. Within minutes, the internal message spread throughout the system. In the control rooms in the later flight, small conversations began to arise. Not loud, but different from before. A young pilot asked his manager, "What happened?" The manager replied, "The procedure is in place." In the economy class of another flight, a flight attendant read an announcement on her phone, then looked up, her eyes pensive. She recalled the time she had been yelled at in front of passengers. This time something had changed. Marcus left the airport in silence. No press, no cameras, just the car that took him to the hotel. On the way, he checked his phone. A message from David Holloway. It's done. The legal team appreciates how you kept things in order. Marcus replied, "Stay focused on the system." Understood, David replied. "We'll be keeping a close eye on things." At the hotel, Marcus stood by the window looking down at the Chicago night traffic. He didn't feel the relief one usually feels after a victory. He only felt order, and order that had just been restored, carefully, quietly. At the train station, Ryan Caldwell left after completing the procedures. He walked slowly, his shoulders heavy. No one saw him off. No one took his picture. Power, when it departs, makes no sound. Caldwell paused at the automatic door, turning his head to look back at the runway. Planes were still taking off. Work continued. There was no room for ego. In another office, Keller signed another document review of economy class operational culture, objective retraining, standardization of communication, and increased independent feedback mechanisms for flight attendants and passengers. Not because of Marcus Reed, but because of what has been revealed. Late at night, Marcus received another text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for speaking up." A passenger. Marcus read it. No reply. He put the phone down. For him, justice isn't about saying thank you. It's about tomorrow somewhere. A person from an economy will be treated better without anyone knowing their name. Ryan Caldwell's apartment was uncomfortably quiet. There was no engine noise, no flight announcements, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the morning light filtering through the curtains, cutting thin strips across the wooden floor. Caldwell sat at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in front of him. He looked at his phone screen, no new notifications. His schedule was blank, a void he wasn't used to. He tried calling a friend at the company. The phone rang for a long time, then stopped. He sent a short text message. No reply. Caldwell put the phone down. His hand trembled slightly this time more noticeably. He took a deep breath, as he always did before maneuvering the plane into the turbulent air. But there was no control panel here for him to hold on to. The investigation file was sent to my email at noon. The language was dry and formal. Prolonged suspension. Review of reporting history. Assessment of abuse of power. Caldwell read every line. He didn't miss anything. He was looking for something to refute a technical error in ambiguous wording. But the text was too well written. He thought of the captain's chair, where he had sat for thousands of hours. He thought of the 4 gold stripes on his shoulder, a symbol of trustworthiness. All of that now seemed like the recent past. That afternoon, Caldwell met with the union representative in a small meeting room. The man opposite him with gray hair spoke slowly. "Ryan, we will protect your rights within the framework of the law," he said. "But there are some things that cannot be changed." "Just because of one passenger," Caldwell blurted out. The agent shook his head. "No, because of a series of actions." Caldwell was silent. He knew what that sequence was. Shouting, hard-hitting reports, quick and convenient judgments. He left the meeting room as dusk was falling. The streetlights came on. The city went on. There was no pause for belated regrets. At home, Caldwell opened the closet and took out his uniform. He hung it on the hook and straightened it. An old habit. He touched the epaulets, then let go. That night, Caldwell couldn't sleep. He thought about the moment on the plane, Miss Reed's calm gaze. Emily Carter's intervention. Keller's words. "We'll take a closer look." He realized that what hurt him most wasn't the suspension. It was being scrutinized and no longer being able to hide it. The next morning, Caldwell received a call from the bank. The loan needed to be reviewed because of a change in employment status. An email from his son's school, a reminder about tuition for the next semester. Very mundane, very specific things. Power, when it departs, leaves behind a bill. Caldwell went out looking for temporary work. He walked into a small logistics company and applied for a shift supervisor position. The manager, younger than him, looked at his resume and then looked up. "You have experience," the man said, "but we need references." Caldwell nodded. "I understand." He left with a strange feeling. For the first time, he was the one waiting for news. Another evening, Caldwell stopped at a small diner near his home. He sat alone. The television on the wall was playing an aviation news broadcast. It didn't mention his name, only talked about bias training and reporting procedures. Caldwell looked at the screen, then back at his glass of water. He remembered the times he'd said, "Economy is a variable." Now, he was the variable. Weeks passed. The decision to conduct a provisional investigation remained in place. There was no formal dismissal, but no return date either. A kind of limbo. In that precarious situation, Caldwell began working night shift deliveries. No one knew who he was. No one called him captain. He wore a reflective vest, carried boxes, and checked barcodes. For the first time, he heard his own voice in a different place. A voice asking permission, a voice questioning. No microphone, no speakers. One evening in the warehouse, a crate nearly tipped over. A young colleague slipped. Caldwell instinctively caught it, just as Marcus had done with Emily. "Thank you," he said. Caldwell nodded. He said nothing. A brief moment, but enough for him to understand what he had missed. Elsewhere, Marcus Reed read the summary report. Caldwell's name wasn't on the first page, just data recommendations and a training roadmap. Marcus closed the file. He didn't feel victorious. He just felt content. Another email arrived from Keller. "We are considering a retraining and reassignment program for suitable candidates. No return to command." Marcus read it. He didn't reply immediately. At the warehouse, Caldwell received an email from the company. An invitation to participate in a reassessment of skills and behavior program with the possibility of reassignment to a ground-based position, not a cockpit. Caldwell read for a long time. He knew what it meant. No glory, no spotlight, but a path. He remembered his father's words from long ago. Power is not meant to be proven. It is meant to serve. Caldwell took a deep breath. He pressed "I agree" to participate. The collapse isn't the bottom. The bottom is when you refuse to learn again. Caldwell looked out at the warehouse parking lot, where the streetlights shone down on the concrete. He didn't know where he was going, but for the first time, he knew he had to go differently. It was a light rain in Chicago that morning. Tiny raindrops tapped steadily against the window panes of the low-floor meeting room at Aurelius Aviation Holdings headquarters. It wasn't a glass-enclosed room overlooking the runway. Just a simple meeting room with a long wooden table and gray fabric-covered chairs. No emblems, no formalities. Ryan Caldwell arrived early. He was wearing a light blue shirt and no tie. He looked neat, but quite different from when he wore his pilot's uniform. He placed his motorcycle helmet on the seat beside him, sat up straight, and clasped his hands together. Thomas Keller entered next, accompanied by a human resources representative and a lawyer. They exchanged brief greetings and sat down. No one spoke immediately. The door opened again. Marcus Reed walked in. There was no eye contact, no ostentatious handshake. Just a very slight nod, enough to acknowledge each other's presence. Keller spoke first. "Thank you all for coming. The purpose of today's meeting is to clarify the terms of reassignment and the roadmap for responsibilities." He looked at Caldwell. "Captain, well, Mr. Caldwell, we've sent the proposal. I wanted to confirm you've read it." Caldwell nodded. "I've read it." He understood. Keller continued that there was no possibility of returning to the cockpit, at least not within the expected time frame. Caldwell looked down at the table, then looked up. "I understand." A moment of silence. The HR officer opened the file, carefully reading each condition: retraining in communication, unconscious bias, working in the ground operations department, direct supervision, periodic evaluation, limited appeals rights. There are no clauses about honor, only about responsibility. "Do you have any questions?" Keller asked. Caldwell took a deep breath. "I have a proposal." Keller gestured for him to continue. "I want to meet." Caldwell paused, choosing his words. "Flight attendant Emily Carter." "Not privately. A representative from the airline will be present." "To apologize in person." Marcus looked up. His gaze wasn't rigid, but it was very alert. "I'm sorry," Marcus said slowly. "It only makes sense not to add more pressure." Caldwell nodded immediately. "I understand. Only if she agrees." Keller noted, "We will ask her opinion. No coercion." Caldwell turned to Marcus. This time, he looked him straight in the eye. I thought I was right. I was wrong. The statement comes without justification. There is no but." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window. The rain was falling steadily. Then, he turned back. "The hardest thing," Marcus said, "is not losing power. It's realizing you've misused it." Caldwell nodded, his throat dry. "I'm studying." The meeting ended with signatures. No one stood up to applaud. Everything was carefully folded up. In the hallway, Keller whispered to Marcus, "Are you sure your presence today is necessary?" Marcus replied, "It's necessary, not for forgiveness, to set a standard." That afternoon, Emily Carter was consulted in a private room with staff present. She listened to the proposal, remaining silent for quite some time. "If I agree," Emily said, "I want it clear that I'm not obligated to please him." The HR person nodded. "Absolutely." Emily nodded. "Then, I agree." The meeting was brief. Caldwell stood, hands clasped in front of him. Emily sat her back straight. Personnel and Keller were present. "I'm sorry," Caldwell said, his voice low, "for not listening, for using my position to impose my will." Emily looked at him and replied, "I accept your apology. But what I need is change, not just words." Caldwell nodded. "I understand." There was no handshake. There were no tears, but a line was drawn. In another room, Marcus signed one last document of the day, the Economy Class Culture Assessment Framework. He read it carefully, making a few corrections. It was clear enough, concise enough. On his way out of the office, Marcus met Keller in the lobby. "You don't need to do all that," Keller said. Marcus smiled faintly. "If we only deal with one person, the system will learn to wait for the next one." Keller nodded. "And Mr. Caldwell, give him a way out," Marcus said. "But don't give him back his old seat." That evening, Caldwell returned to the warehouse where he worked the night shift. Today, he wasn't loading or unloading. He'd been assigned to provide safety instruction to a new team, a small task, but one that required patience. A young colleague asked, "Were you a pilot?" Caldwell nodded. "Yes." "So, why are you here?" Caldwell thought for a second. "Because I need to relearn it." He nodded without asking any further questions. At the hotel, Marcus closed his laptop. He sat silently for a while. Not because he was tired, but because he was thinking. Making amends isn't about going back to where you started, he thought. It's about moving on in a different way. Outside, the rain has stopped. The city lights are coming on. Night flights are taking off regularly and on time. The system is still functioning, but the standards have shifted. A month after Flight AA 417 Autumn had arrived in Chicago, the leaves changed color slowly without haste. The city was still noisy, but within that noise there was a familiar rhythm, the rhythm of continuity. Marcus Reed was sitting in the economy class of another flight. This time, he chose a window seat, not to save money, just because he wanted to see the clouds. He placed the small leather briefcase under the front seat exactly as he had done before. No one noticed. No one looked at him for more than a second. And that was exactly what he wanted. The flight attendant walked over smiling. "Sir, would you like some water?" "Thanks," Marcus replied. "A glass of water will do." She nodded and continued walking. Her voice was normal. Her gaze was normal. Nothing special, and that's why everything was right. Marcus looked out the window. White clouds drifted by sunlight, filtering through, creating soft streaks of light. He thought about the question many people had asked him after the incident in Chicago. "Do you think it's worth it?" Marcus never answered immediately, because that question didn't have a short answer. At Aurelius Aviation Holdings headquarters, Thomas Keller concluded an internal meeting. On the screen was the quarterly summary report. The number of negative feedbacks from economy class cabins had decreased. The rate of internal reporting had increased, a paradoxical but positive sign. When people dare to speak up, the system learns where it stands. Keller turned off the screen and stood up. He didn't think of Marcus Reed as a powerful shareholder. He thought of him as a moral anchor, a rare quality in cold, hard decisions. In the flight attendant's break room, Emily Carter folded her uniform after her shift. She still remembered the trembling in her hands that day, but the memory no longer frightened her. It had become a milestone. A young flight attendant approached. "Emily, a passenger apologized to me today for speaking loudly. I didn't know how to respond." Emily smiled. "I said thank you. Then I got back to work. Is that all?" "Yes," Emily said. "Sometimes being respected is enough." Laura Mitchell walked past, overheard, and nodded. "Susan said it, we don't always win, but at least we don't have to suffer in silence anymore." At a suburban warehouse, Ryan Caldwell finished his shift. He took off his gloves and wiped the sweat from his forehead. This job didn't give him a sense of control. It gave him limitations. A young colleague asked Mr. Caldwell, "Do you think you'll ever get back to flying?" Caldwell pondered. "I don't know, but I know I won't be going back to how things used to be." He nodded as if that answer was sufficient. Caldwell got into his car and drove home. On the radio, a program was about workplace culture, about how power can distort judgment. Caldwell turned off the radio. He didn't need to listen any further. He was living in the answer. That evening, Marcus Reed received a short email from Keller. "We've adopted a new set of regulations. No one's name is mentioned, but you'll understand the spirit of it." Marcus replied, "Keep it alive." He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The engine hummed steadily. The woman sitting next to him, a middle-aged woman, was reading a book. The cover talked about learning to listen in a noisy world. Marcus smiled very slightly. When the plane landed, everyone stood up to collect their luggage. No one was detained. No one was pointed at. The flight ended like thousands of other flights, and that was the quietest victory. At the train station, a sign hung high. "We are committed to respecting all passengers." No one stopped to read it for long, but it was there. Every day, Marcus stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool air. He thought about his father, about that old saying, "You don't need to change the whole world. You just need to change how you stand in it." He stood, not taller than anyone, not shorter than anyone, just in the right place. In another corner of the city, Emily Carter called her mother. "I'm okay," she said. "I feel seen." In the warehouse, Caldwell opened his small notebook and wrote a line. "Today I listened. No fireworks, no new titles. Only small changes are needed enough to make tomorrow different from yesterday." And perhaps that is how justice endures the longest. This isn't a story about a flight. It's about how people treat each other when they have power in their hands. Ryan Caldwell believed that power comes from title. Marcus Reed understood that true power comes from how we use it when no one forces us to be kind. In life, especially as we go through the years, we've all been on both sides. Sometimes we're the underestimated ones. Sometimes we're the ones in control. The biggest lesson here isn't about who wins and who loses. It's about who you choose to become when you have power. Marcus Reed could easily have taken revenge. He could have made a big fuss, humiliated others, or even ruined Ryan Caldwell's career. But he didn't. He chose discipline over retaliation. He chose systems over emotions. He chose correction over crushing. That's the kind of maturity only those who have suffered enough injustice can possess. For older audiences, this story reminds us that silence is not always the noblest form of forbearance. But speaking up doesn't have to be loud or harsh. The most enduring kindness is kindness based on principles. It also reminds us of something even more important. It's never too late to learn again. Ryan Caldwell lost power, but he didn't lose the opportunity to become a better person. Redemption isn't about returning to your old position, but about moving forward with a new perspective. Ultimately, this story leaves us with a very real hope. When one person is calm enough and in the right place, the entire system, however slowly, can change. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If you see yourself in it, or if it makes you think a little more about how we treat each other every day, that's enough. Don't forget to like and share so this story can reach more people. And subscribe to the channel to continue following these profound, authentic, and very real-life stories. We can't change the whole world, but we can always start by how we treat other people.